And we are live. Welcome everyone on LinkedIn joining us here today. I'm very happy to be your host for this LinkedIn Live on advancing women and why we should do it and how we should do it, especially as I have had the pleasure of accompanying a couple of our clients through running female leadership development programs. I'm joined today by Jenna, who coaches and facilitates on this topic and has been very passionate about it for her entire lifetime. She'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. And Debbie, co-CEO of Thriving Talent and also great advocate of advancing women. We decided to focus on this topic today because we're approximately 1 month after International Women's Day, where we heard a lot about different actions that should be taken, how the world should be changing, which is great. We also heard, that there's a lot to be done, possibly up to 300 years until we really do achieve gender equality. So, and it's really a thing for us that it shouldn't only be about International Women's Day, right? There are many, many days in the year, and on all of them we could speak about advancing women. So that's why we wanted to pick that topic up again today and talk together about it, but also talk to you about it. So you have a comment function on LinkedIn. So if you have comments to add, questions you want us to speak to, please do use that function and we'll pick up the comments and questions as we go along. But having said that, I'm going to maybe start with a question for you, Debbie. So tell us again, why are we here? And why are we even talking about this topic of advancing women?
Hi, thank you, Eleanor and Jenna, and hello to anyone who's listening live or recorded. Well, as you said in the introduction, really, we are, because the scary statistics are still telling us that we're 300 years away from gender parity, and we can have the perspective of and so what. So if you take away the social and the ethical piece of it, and you put on a commercial lens, the reason we're talking about it and the reason we have to amplify it every day of the year is that those businesses who do have that gender parity at all levels of leadership, are known and have the data to prove that they are more profitable. They typically have higher success. They have a huge difference in their employee value proposition and retention. And so it's very much the capitalist side is played to. If you advance women, you're as a business, you will thrive more, profitability wise and in terms of engagement and value proposition. So there's really kind of inaction isn't really an option in this topic. But I know, Jenna, you feel strongly about this too, and that we're still talking about it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it shows when McKinsey just put out a report that there's a 19% increase in revenue, for those groups, boards, companies that have that greater diversity. And it just shows how entrenched those biases are when it's overriding the very clear business case of why to do it, and not just looking at advancing women. I think also when we're looking, these programs also help shine a light within organizations of the other diversity dimensions that are also not represented at the higher level. And so we look at the intersectionality of that. It's the inequities within the inequities. So not just advancing women, it's also about advancing women of different ethnic origin, language, physical ability, sexual orientation, and also representing those groups in higher levels as well.
Yeah. And I think, Eleanor, I mean, this won't come to any surprise to yourself, but what's really important in this dialogue is coming to the roots, one of the most significant root causes of this problem, and that is this, what we talk about caring and career. And there's this crash that typically happens at the point in a lot of females' lives when they make a choice to have a caring role, usually early 30s, late 20s, and then that's often the time when people may start families. And we know that in the latest data is, females, whether we like it or not, spend about 7.7 hours on caring than their male counterparts. And that does have a huge impact on many different levels, and I'm sure we'll dive into them. But it's really important to come back to the root cause. We wouldn't even be talking about female-only leadership programs and debating if they're right or not if we didn't have this problem in the first place. And a lot of the root cause of this does come down from the caring and the career crash. This starts in the early days when you're fueling the talent pipeline, but it continues. Females do continue in that role of being the carer, whether that's then caring for children of all ages, not just babies and maternity bias, all ages, and then aging parents, and then you become in that sandwich generation. And women are often forced to make those conscious choices and sometimes regret those choices. And so this is really why I always want to amplify that message that if you enable caring in career, we will not be having these conversations about targeted interventions to advance a certain gender or sex. As always, caring and career, I always weave that in somehow.
Of course, and you absolutely must. And that actually leads me to a question that I was going to ask you a little bit later on in the conversation, but maybe I'll bring it forward, and I hope that's okay. And maybe Jenna, you can speak to it a bit, and then I know Debbie, you'll add to that. But we hear a lot, and I think that really connects to me for this caring career. And also, you were speaking about sort of barriers and women not being able to do a certain thing. And we hear a lot about, we need to fix the system and not the women right in the system. So I'd love to hear also, how are we doing that by running such programs? So how does that kind of fit together with that expectation, Jenna?
It's a great question. I don't think it's a binary answer of do we fix the system or advance women. I think it's a work of both. And I think building on Deb's point, it's not just about supporting women, it's also about supporting men who are fathers so that the workplace allows them to also fulfill those needs as well. And I think the programs that we've seen that have the most impact are the ones that have senior leadership sponsorship and championship of that they're driving it. It's not the tail wagging the dog. And that also that managers are involved in it, because it's one thing to have these programs for women and encourage them to ask for more, to be bolder. And if you don't address the environment on which those requests are made, it's going to be frustrating on both sides. So it's an opportunity. Actually, we found that the managers are really welcoming those sessions as well, and that greater awareness, because they're not separate from that system. They're impacted as well by many of the same challenges of the people who are reporting to them.
Absolutely. I think from what I've heard, and Debbie, I think you can add to that, right? We spoke about that a little bit already ahead of time, that it does go hand in hand, like Jenna was saying, right? They're running these kind of programs and also making sure that the environment and the system is being looked after or looked at as well. Yeah, absolutely. I love how you say it, Jen. It's not binary, and it isn't. Why should it should be either or? You absolutely need to have both. And in fact, of course, when we're talking about this, and it's a great conversation because often there's different perspectives. And there is a perspective that if you have a female-only leadership program, you are amplifying that fix a female piece, as you said, Eleanor. And it does lean into that kind of gender tax, that we have, that it's the female's responsibility to fix rather than the system to fix. And it does amplify that gender stereotyping. So you can understand why people say, well, is this not a bit of a contradiction in terms? And yet there's, I know we'll come to the benefits of having a female-only leadership program, that there's lots of reasons why. And equally, it has to be a yes and. It has to be a yes and fix a system, and drawing on all of those points you made, Jenna, that needs to be looking at, well, is the system one which is really trying
is really working on, it's probably not there already if we're still doing these programs, but they're really committed or intentional about, having that inclusive culture and that, having inclusive leadership. So that's part of the overall system, is that there is a buy-in to, yes, we need to acknowledge and address some of these obstacles and look at us as individuals and how inclusive we are. So that's, that is a really key part. And the reality is, if you've just fixed the female by putting them through some amazing leadership programs, then what you will see is those female leaders becoming more bold, more clear, more confident, and more committed to their career. And if the system they're in can't provide an enabling environment for that, they'll leave. So whatever you do, don't spend thousands or even millions on a female leadership program unless you are generally also addressing the system, because all you'll be doing is investing in a program that will be incredible, and you'll then have the additional cost because you'll then be backfilling.
You're training them really well for their next job. And also, I think it's important to recognize that a more inclusive environment is not only to the benefit of women, it's also to the benefit of men, because incorporating men, I think, equally in many ways can suffer from this more traditional classic style of workplace culture that I've worked with lots of men who have maybe the less kind of traditional masculine aggressive qualities at work that in many places have been really like reinforced and valued, and they're suffering in those environments as well. And we're seeing the result of when workplaces are more collaborative, are more inclusive. And by creating an incubator for this to happen, it's not just about advancing women, it's advancing a more collaborative, inclusive culture in the workplace that everyone is going to benefit from, regardless of their diversity dimensions. That's actually in support of their diversity dimensions.
Absolutely. I think we're already sort of into my next question, Jenna. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. I'll maybe stay with Jenna actually for a moment from you about that. So when you are delivering these programs, what is it that you're seeing during and after the program in terms of impact that these programs are having?
I think it's important to recognize that many women themselves are asked that question. Should we be in an all-female space? Should we create this program just for women? And I think what they realize very quickly is the impact of creating a community and a network where they can freely speak about some of the issues that often they think are particular to themselves or are a result of an inadequacy related to them, instead of recognizing that it's more systemic, some of these challenges, and to create a safe space where you're normalizing some of the concerns that they have and creating this space where it can be addressed, where it can be, people can share ideas and support, and you're also creating a natural network, which women are not naturally conditioned to have. Often in teams, especially at this more senior levels, there aren't as many women represented. So in terms of having that broader community and understanding from the sessions we've been doing, you really see the benefit of it. And I think it's important to recognize that the dynamic is different from a single gender to a mixed gender group. And one of my favorite examples of this is I was doing a parenting transition workshop, and the majority were mothers, and there was one father, which was great to have the father involved in it. And he had to leave early, and he called me and he said, I have to leave early, so if you could make any of the content relevant to fathers at the beginning before I leave, that would be great. And I thought, isn't that amazing? If I were the only female in a training, would I call the facilitator and ask them, any content relevant to me, if you could please put it sooner? And I just thought this was such an amazing contrast of how that dynamic can be, and to address some of those more sensitive issues that there's not really the forum to discuss in the workplace together.
Yeah. I love that. I love what you're picking up there, and it links to what's the benefit of doing that, because when I look at the different leadership programs that we've been part of, and you see the difference, and I think this is a gift that once you've been in the various programs, it's hard to undo. I think at the beginning, and there's been different programs we've run in different countries, and I think of the women at the very beginning. So if we think, Jenna, some of the Empower Your Future, at the very beginning, not a lot of speaking up, and a lot of hesitation, and a lot of doubt. And typically, again, when you're doing a program like this, it is really important to do a survey beforehand to understand and to try and qualify and quantify where those individuals are, especially if it's a confidential survey, because you've got a great reference point then as to what is the benefit of doing it, why bother. And it also reinforces the reason why sometimes it does need to be one gender only. But when you see the difference after several weeks or several months, depending on what program there's many out there, you see there's a shift in that clarity. Often we fall into jobs, don't we? And you end up doing your job and then get to the next one, often because you've been put forward, whether you've consciously thought this is a job I want. It just happens. And then especially females, this is something that we see a lot. You're kind of very grateful and appreciative for that. But have you actually stepped off the treadmill and thought, what is it that I would really love? If I dared to dream, what is it I'm going for? And the difference you see when these programs, which for exactly the reasons you mentioned, Jen, in terms of the space it's created, you see this shift that they think, well, what if that is possible? And because they have the space to speak up, they get inspired by each other. And we've seen that where someone might say, do you know what? If I dared to dream, I would be the CFO. And someone else will hear that and think, oh, hang on, hold it then. Hang on, I'm going to reverse what I really want out of this program now, because you've just upped the game. If we're going to go for that, then I would like to be the CIO. And that's what I love, Eleanor, is in these environments, and you don't always get it when it's not female only, is there's this safety in numbers to speak up and to bounce off each other and think, well, actually, why not? And that is the magic that you see. And then you see that come through at the end, where, Jenna, you just shared with me before we came on air that one of the individuals through one of our recent programs has just been promoted, and you just saw it on LinkedIn. And isn't that, this is the point, it increases retention, promotion, and that's a gift, isn't it?
It really is so magical to see the growth of the individuals from the start to the end. And a big part is measuring that impact, that it's not just, oh, it feels right. It's very concretely measuring how they're seeing themselves, how they're showing up at the beginning compared to how they show up at the end. And you see the participants show up more fully. So can you imagine the impact to the bottom line when more than half of your employee population is showing up more fully and giving more? It's taking that extra step. And an interesting dynamic we saw in one of the last sessions is that sometimes a manager has a bigger vision for the employee than they have for themselves. And that through coaching and the program, it was that they allowed themselves to, not all managers have a bigger vision for them. If you're lucky enough to do, and the manager can't push you into it. So it's about helping to equip the individual to step into that greater vision of, I see you as a CFO. Do you see yourself as a CEO yet? And often the answer is no, because it's these self-limiting beliefs of, oh, well, I'm a mother. Oh, I'm too young. I don't have enough experience. Oh, I don't want to commit to that right now, because what if I want to do X, Y, and Z? sense, we create a lot of our own self-limitations because of how we're conditioned. So it is really amazing to see that magic and how we've been able to measure the impact of that, and seeing that people are putting themselves forward for opportunities that aren't prevented, that aren't being held back from them. It's just that they're not stepping into them.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm
Love this
ready
topic.
already. I'm ready to join the program. But anyway, let's speak quickly because of that, so that other, organizations can also get ready about it. Let's speak about, and we spoke a little about the environment, the system involving managers. But what do companies have to take into consideration when they're embarking on this kind of journey and thinking about starting a female leadership program?
Shall I come to it first?
Yes.
And then, well, I think the first thing is probably what I talked about earlier, which will seem very an unusual thing to say, is beware of the attrition, beware of empowering people, because they will make some conscious choices. And so if you're going to do this, do it with a huge commitment. Not just a heart, do it with a huge commitment. And so what I mean by that is, when you think of the other considerations when you're launching a female-only leadership program, is actually the first question you should be answering is, let's imagine you've gone through that, you've invested in a program and you've come to the end. It's a so what test. What's next? Because, well, any of us, if we're encouraged to join some kind of development program, there's a sense of sponsorship in that, isn't there? There's an activated sponsorship. And so the next question, we raise our expectations naturally, and you want it to lead to something. And so one of the first questions we always say to organizations is, okay, so let's imagine you've gone through this program knowing that the probability is at the end you're going to have a group of incredibly empowered and clearer females who know what they want. What are you going to do? Now, of course, the next obstacle will come up is, well, we can't suddenly fire or get everyone to go into early retirement. And this is where, Jen, you talked really well about this. You have to be very careful, because what about often the men who are in those positions? Are we saying that men's careers are over? So you need to think about that before you even start. And you need to be creative about, okay, so what does growth look like? What is a sense of sponsorship look like? It doesn't have to be always a promotion, because there may not be a seat at that moment on the table. But what it does look like is maybe, that individual will then be working on a high visibility project, or a project which actually then has a P&L associated with it, or they'll be leading a greater number of people. But you need to think about that, what happens at the end before you even start. And that's a consideration that's often forgotten. And there's a real big risk to that, because you're heightening expectation, and then you get to the end, then so what? So that's probably a really, really big consideration. And then the second piece, again, Jenna mentioned this, is around that engaging managers. Female leadership programs, for them to be successful, and we fully are behind them, is actually the females, the participants, maybe females. The program isn't female centric. The program needs to involve and engage managers, and often senior leadership team managers, therefore often men. It needs to have that sense of, we talk about the 3 A's. It's that accountability for managers, that they're fully supportive of this, and they're also getting trained. They're also part of the journey, in terms of getting those skills on how they can be an effective ally. That's a really important point, not just for the female on this program, an ally for all of those individuals. Back to the intersectionality you mentioned, Jenna. So it's the accountability, it's the allyship, and it's the advocacy. Your senior leadership team really need to be advocates and change champions. Otherwise, often it's more of a quick fix to say, look, we are paying attention to females. Yeah, exactly, Jen.
Jen, I'll ask you to add to that just in a moment. I just wanted to say, for the people that are listening in on LinkedIn Live at the moment and have the option of asking questions, I know I'm asking lots of questions, but you're also allowed to ask questions. So if you do have a question, because I can't send yet, do add it as a comment, and I'm happy to put your question forward to Jenna and Debbie as well. But Jenna, what would you add? What do organizations need to consider when embarking on this journey?
I think it's really important for organizations, leaders, to have the language to dispel the myth that a program to advance women comes at the detriment of advancing men. What these programs are is not to advance women for the sake of just advancing them. It's about helping to remove some of the barriers that have impeded qualified women from advancing. And one leadership program for women is not going to override the systemic biases and gender taxes. It's something to help override some of those barriers that are making women and the system not support the advancement of women to the optimal amount. And these programs, a lot of the things that come up about what's happening in the system, it's a really great source of information to look at the themes that are within the organization to help be addressed. So I think that the key is that receptivity of being open to what's being said, not be afraid that what's going to be said when this group comes together, because it's really an opportunity. And the fact that these individuals are engaged and wanting to share and make these suggestions is a really good sign. It's much more concerning when they just stop talking and they disengage. So I think if you're going to embark on this program, it's a really exciting step in the journey of advancing the culture in your organization to be more inclusive. And sometimes it's a little bit messy and uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's how you're going to progress. And I think what we've seen from the participants of other programs is how loyal they are to these organizations, how they continue to step up and give more. So it's really an opportunity at the individual, the team, and the higher leadership levels to have these conversations.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm not seeing any questions from the live audience, so I'm going to interpret that I've been asking the right questions, or you've been giving the right answers, or a combination of both. But what that does mean is it leaves us with just a couple of minutes. So I'd love to hear maybe sort of a minute from each of you of what does it mean for you personally, seeing the impact of these programs? Debbie, we'll start with you.
What it means to me personally is that the whole mission behind our work, my work, is about making choices, not having choices made for you. And obviously we've seen that when we talk about the caring in Korea, and how actually that applies to everybody. It is inclusive. It's about self-care, caring for children, caring for aging parents, caring in the community. That's about making conscious choices and not having those made and then ones you regret. And what I love about all of these types of interventions and programs is women often find their voice, and they become more aware of what are some choices they do want to make that maybe, for all the reasons Jenna mentioned, they don't. And where do they need to challenge the system, or where do they need to actually just say, no, this is what I want. And the more we can do to help everyone do that, everybody in organizations, and humanize them, then we're onto a winner. And so that's why it's meaningful.
Thanks, Debbie. Jenna, I know elevating voices is always something that's top of your radar, but so tell us, what does it mean for you seeing the impact of these programs?
Thank you. For me, this topic of inclusion and exclusion was almost one of my first experiences, as my father was an Iranian immigrant to Canada. And from my earliest memories, we're seeing how he was excluded and how the impact of biases on him and by extension by us. So I was very attuned so early of what makes people included and excluded. And I think this has been a theme that I've been aware of my whole life. And so for me, it's not just about advancing women, because it's like you don't get to choose your ism. You don't get to just address sexism. It's about racism and homophobia and ageism, because it's all in the same pool. We can't say, oh, we're just going to clean this part of the pool, because it's all based on the same biases or fear. And so for me, when we can have programs where you can elevate someone's voice who has typically either quieted themselves or has been quieted, that we're getting, for me, it's just irrational that we're not getting the full potential of so many individuals, like what that would do for our economy, what that would do for our societies, our political structures. If we were hearing more diverse perspectives, we would all benefit. So yes, this is something that's deeply personal to me. And for me, I know that my life is going to be better if we're hearing, the voices of, trans community, of, different religions and different physical abilities. And we're all going to, the result is going to impact all of us. So that's what it means for me.
Thanks, Jenna. I think that's an excellent word to end our session on as well. I haven't seen any questions come in, and we're also at time. So I think at this point it's to say thank you for those who joined us live today in April, and thank you also to everyone who's taking the time to watch this recording later on. Thank you, Jenna and Debbie, for having this conversation with me. It was very insightful for me, and I enjoyed spending time with you here today.
Thank you, Eleanor.
See you all soon. Reach out to us, email, LinkedIn, our website, however it is that you want to talk to us. And have a wonderful day. Goodbye.